Well, hello, folks. Welcome back. A new season of This IS Research. Hello, Nick. Good to see you. I haven't seen you for a
Brecker,
while.
Brecker, my brother. Yes, you were vacationing all summer, right? That's what you do. You go to the south of France and you take 2 months down there on a beach, right?
I took 3 weeks. There's no beach, but yeah, I took a break in July. But I've been actually quietly busy for a couple of weeks. But yeah, how was your summer? Did you take
Wait,
some
you
time
did
off?
you did 3 weeks in a row
Yeah.
at a place in another country.
Yes.
Don't you get sick of it and want to come home, or you just love it? And you
No, we like it. We like it. But as a family, like sort of after 3 weeks, we sort of we're getting ready to go home.
see, I'm like that after 3 days. I do
Nah,
three
no.
days anywhere. At the third day, maybe fourth day, I'm like, all right, I'm ready to go home. All right.
Now, we visited my sister, so we did a little trips in between. But yeah, we stayed there for a
Mm.
bit over 3 weeks, and then we feel recharged. And I'm really, really happy to go back and get some work done, which is nice because now everybody else is on holiday and no one bugs me, and I can get some work done, which is really
Yeah.
nice.
Well, see, I'm an American, and we can't wake up and look ourselves in the mirror if we took 3 weeks of vacation, right? We pride ourselves on vacationing as little as possible. So we did a couple little trips, but you know what I did is work related. I went to Academy of Management, right? The world's biggest management conference. It was in Seattle. Beautiful, sunny. Seattle, they always say Washington is known for its rain and being overcast. The entire time we were there,
And for vampires from
oh,
Twilight.
vampire. Oh, is that where that was? And
Yeah.
homeless people now. There's tons of homeless. But yeah. So Academy of Management was there. The CTO division is the one that I'm on this leadership rotation for. It's the whatever what communications, digital technology, and organizing organizations.
Yeah.
And we're computational people studying computing, people doing computing, right? It's where they can all talk to each other. Anyway, we did this doctoral consortium, and it gave me an idea for what we should talk about today. I talked to a couple of the students, and we were talking about journals. And journals are so important to our business. And there are journalists, people count journal articles and all of this sort of thing, and they don't really know, like, have a feel for the differences between these journals. Like, even just MISQ and ISR, is there a difference between those two? Those may be the premium IS journals. Like, how would you characterize the differences? And then go look at status, what types of things they publish, the basket journals, the basket of 6 or 8 or however many are in that basket, other things, Financial Times, UT Dallas, there are these lists. So I figured we'd talk about journals today.
We can talk about journals, yeah. So, I always liken journals to newspapers. Newspapers. There's different newspapers. There are different audiences for newspapers. They don't all publish the same thing, and they don't talk about the same topics the same way. The Sun is different from the Times, from the Mirror. That's my analogy. And you can
Mm.
make of that if you will. Some would say the Times is better than the Sun or the Mirror or whatever, and other people would say, look, they just speak to different chords. And I think the same way about journals. They have different
Yeah.
audiences. They push different topics. They have certain perspectives. And together it's like a bouquet or a portfolio. You just got to know which of your statements is going to go for what audience, and therefore to which newspaper, so to speak.
Yeah. And the way I think about it is so actually Foucault in like 1970 studied academic disciplines. And Andrew Abbott, who also studied academic disciplines, they came up with the same conclusion, although from different areas. And they basically said that if you try and come up with the content, if you try and distinguish academic disciplines based on what they do, you won't be able to do it because they overlap with each other, right? Abbott called it, jurisdictional claims. They claim jurisdiction over an area of the world. But so IS, operations, marketing, a lot of these fields are studying the same thing. So it's like, well, how do you know if you're an IS researcher or a marketing researcher? Well, sometimes it's just a matter of which journal you publish in. The journals are really the conversation. To me, it's not the professional societies, it's the journals that define the discipline. And for us, we have a dozen journals, maybe, give or take, that if you publish in those journals and you publish regularly, then you're part of the IS discipline.
Okay, let's say a dozen. Dozen is a nice number. Let's go through them. Let's see whether you and I have the same 12 journals we just
Okay.
talk about. So we probably both agree the what are they called? The basket of eight. That's 8 of the 12, right?
Yeah.
So what are the other four?
Well, all right. So what are the other four? Well, here it depends on your bias, right? So the first one I would mention is information and organization, right? Because that's kind of a social theoretic, largely qualitative journal. And I'm kind of a social theoretic person and I do qualitative stuff.
And you're an editor of that journal, aren't you?
And I'm an editor of that journal. So and that journal gets a lot of eyeballs. A lot of people publish there. It's not on any lists or anything like that, but it's incredibly well read. And so I would immediately put that up there. Just as it, but there are others. INM is one, information
that's the
and
one
management.
that comes to my mind immediately.
Yeah, which again is not on any lists. I don't publish there. I haven't yet anyway, but I think it's always well respected. And what else? What else am I missing?
Well, the CAS, communication of the AIS, we talked about that a little bit, right? So that's also because it's part of the AIS, is one of their journals. They have a few, but these are CAS and JS are sort of the two flagship journals. And then there are a couple of, I guess, country-specific journals. Here in Germany, of course, there's BISA, which used to be called Wirtschaftsinformatik, right? The German word, Wirtschaftsinformatik. And if you go back by that, it goes back 60 years. I think the first issue was published in 1959 or something. Yeah. Now, BISA, like they changed the name and they changed the language of that journal to English to make it more international. A couple of years ago, so it looks like a young journal, but in a way, it goes back longer than any of the other IS journals.
But it has a tremendous impact factor, BISA, because a lot of Germans publish a lot. They'll publish a lot there, and they read it and they cite it. That's we have an enormous IS community in Germany, and they read that journal.
They read that journal, and it's a pretty well-respected journal. It has some great articles in there. So like over the years, but the volume isn't high. It's still very German, and most Germans actually publish in many of the international journals. So actually, the submission numbers are compared to the other journals are very, very low. Like for example, INM. I know it has over 2,000 submissions. And BISA has about 200 to 300, and 80-90% of these are Germans. It's sort of still like a national type of journal. It's not really a truly international journal. The editorial board is obviously a German dominated, although they're changing that. So it's sort of, I think it wants to be one of the general top level international journals, and it's taking steps, but obviously takes a while.
And it has a tremendous impact factor. It gets a lot of eyeballs. And I think it's respected. So I think BISA might be a good place to publish, actually, if it's something.
So have you? I've published articles there. It has a very good, efficient review process. There's good editors on board. You get 2 to 3 reviewers to sort of sharpen sharp. 1, 2, 3 rounds, poof. So it's a good experience. It's good. So when we talk about journals, we should talk a little bit about what the review process are, because I think there's still a huge variance in review process quality between the journals.
Yeah. But let's go to BISA back there a little bit, right? We talked about INO, information and organization, and how that's like, if you're doing social theoretic, organizational theory, qualitative, that's a good place to go. BISA, I would, and this is just my limited understanding of it. All right, there are 2 things to do with BISA. One is if you have German design science, right? Process management, you're designing an artifact, that sort of thing. There would be a lot of people who can handle it. And then they have this catchword article thing where if you have an idea, they kind of let you publish your idea. So that I guess
they got the catchword article, which is sort of like a short. I have never done this, but it's sort of like a short 4-pager on a up and coming concept or phenomenon or something like this. Draw attention to it nice and early, and obviously these types of papers attract citations. It does have departments for particular topic areas in design science and sort of IS engineering, enterprise architecture, that modeling, that type of stuff also has a department there. But by and large, they publish everything, a topical, methodological, and theoretical variety. I published multiple case study papers there. So it's like anything for the German community. It's a general purpose German community. It's just that a lot of the German community happens to do design science. And I don't know. I haven't checked it, but I would wager that most papers in there are not design science. Simple, so it's not a design science journal, but it is one of the journals if you do design science, you can safely send it there.
So Let's go in the other direction real quick. We picked some of our favorite that maybe aren't on the list. Let's look at MISQ and ISR. I think those are widely known to be the top two journals in the field of information systems.
Yeah.
Are they different in any way? How would you characterize the difference?
They're different. I think they have different missions, different strategies, and they have very different boards. I think these are important. If you go to any student, you always you got to look at the board. Who are the decision makers that would look at your paper, right? And I think the boards, they're quite differently composed between MIS Quarterly and RSR. So I would say MIS Quarterly strives to have a very broad diversity of topical and methodological areas. Yeah. So they a couple of years ago, they had this editorial saying like, we're a big tent. Like all of our scholarship, however construed, can come to our tent and we publish all of it. So I know that they're actually making very proactive and very conscious decisions about representing particular methodological genres and making sure they have coverage for any of them, topical, theoretical, and phenomenological sort of phenomenon-driven expertise on the board. Yeah, and I think they're one of the few journals that have that particular strategy, to be very, very broad and inclusive in terms of genres and different flavors of ICE research.
So I think MISQ, I agree with you. They're trying to be broad and inclusive and everything, but I don't know. ISR is not broad and inclusive. I feel like they have economics, behavior. Like if I'm looking at their editorial board right now, they have my buddy here with me, Ahmed Abbasi. I mean, that's like computer science, design science.
I'm not saying like I only talked to
Supra, qualitative. They're pretty diverse, right? Bingu and a bunch of economists.
I was just talking about MIS Quarterly. I would say ISR is very diverse and inclusive, but in a different way. I think what ISR does tremendously well is that it bridges the boundaries between two other fields, OM, marketing, economics, and it does that much better, I think, than MIS Quarterly. MIS Quarterly is very IS sort of, us-centric. It's our journal, etc. And ISR, I think, is attracting a lot of interest from other disciplines, however you construe them. And they do this really, really well. And yes, you can send qualitative papers there and design science paper and everything else there. But I think they have a board that is dedicated to bridging into economics, operations, marketing, maybe less so strategy, So that's just my perception.
Yeah, and my perception has always been, that of the two, I guess, so there's perception and reality, right? And I've published in both. And the fact is, MISQ, my perception is that it's very much more diverse, like you're saying, whereas ISR has a lot more economists. And if you look, both analytical modelers and kind of econometrics folks, and they publish a lot of that work. And if you look at their associate editors, they have a lot more. So it's not a matter of they're not diverse. I think they are. But I think that they simply just have more economics as a percentage of their what they publish. So that would be my
As I said, I think within field diversity is higher for MIS Quarterly, but is within the IS field. And I would say that ISR is better in terms of between field diversity. I think I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, we might give it that. Although within field diversity, I think you can publish anything in ISR that you publish in MISQ, right? Any design science, any qualitative. So it's not like one is excluding what you would publish in the other. So I think there's a lot of overlap, and that's why you see people send to one, and then after they revise, they'll send to the other. Well, now, my question to you is this. Academia is a lot about status. Is there a status difference between ISR and MISQ, or are they the same?
I think that depends on who you ask. I think there are certain groups that assign higher status to, let's say, Quarterly, and others to ISR. And to me, they both have equal high standards. I think they're simply, to me, they're the top two journals. That's it. Yeah. End of story. And I don't think I would discriminate between the two very much. I think that I think that some people do, and it depends a little bit on where you're coming from and so forth. I can only tell you, like for me personally, and I don't even know what that is, but I have sent more papers to MIS Quarterly,
right,
than I have to ISR. But for whatever reason, that's not a statement about status that I assign to any of them.
Well, I think that they're probably, most people who look at it, most people involved with it in the IS field, we assign the same, they're the same. They're the two elite journals. Now, outside of the IS field in the United States, I will tell you that ISR probably has a little bit of a nod in a lot of fields. And that's because they're part of Informs.
Yeah.
And Informs is very powerful here.
Yeah.
You know, it's got management science, OrgSci, you know, all the operations journals, MSOM, and they have a lot of status at elite schools. So if you're at Wharton or NYU or something, right, the Informs, the operations management has always been strong. So they think Informs has a certain credibility that maybe AIS doesn't, right? So I think if you're looking in elite strata, maybe some of those folks think more highly of ISR, not based on any substance, but just based on the fact that it's
and it's an interesting little thing to notice. I mean, I agree with you, right? I heard the same thing. And if you think about it, Informs is a very strong brand, also because they do have some very excellent journals, right? It can't be coincidence that, you know, they have Managed Science, Org Science, Service Science, Operations Management, I think, as well. Journal of Operations Management.
No, I don't think that's it's MSOM.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so they have very strong journals. It's a very strong professional body, and one of the quirky things about the Quarterly is that, you know, it's run by the University of Minnesota. It's not affiliated directly to any of the bodies, not to AOM, not to Informs, not to ACM, not to AIS. It's not an AIS journal. It's run by the university. And I think in that list of UT Dallas or FT50, it might be the only one that is still sort of independent, so to speak. Yeah, without qualifying that in any way, just saying like it's independently run by University of Minnesota with a governing board behind it and stuff.
All right. Before we get to other journals, I'm going to shift gears real quick. Outside of our field, you know, I think in business schools in elite US, maybe ISR gets the nod because of Informs. I think MISQ gets the nod internationally quite a bit, and that's a large part because of the impact factor. The MISQ has a larger impact factor, and you know, it seems to be more well known in some circles. But now my question to you is this: outside of our field, in another management journal, you mentioned the UT Dallas list or something. What are if you had to come up with the 3 most prestigious management journals? Not Nature or Science or Sociology, but the 3 most prestigious non-IS management journals, what are they?
Well, that's a tough one. So I would say probably Management Science is there. One of the Academy of Management sort of review or journal. Mm-hmm. And then the third one is tough because the third one is already, I think, depending on the field. So Org Science is there, but in the entrepreneurship, is it different? Maybe JMS or a Journal of Strategic, you know, one of the strategy journals.
You didn't say ASQ, Administrative Science Quarterly.
ASQ is a sociology journal. Not a management. Yeah.
I always thought it was like it's administrative science, right? That's what it's called. I don't know. It seems like that was, to me, always the top. You know, if you had to pick the top management journal, it was ASQ. And then afterwards, you had AMJ, AMR, SMJ. You know, SMJ is Strategic Management Journal, right? It's for strategy folks, and then you go.
See, I look at it. I look at what we're doing as a very layered model, right? So we're doing information systems, but on a higher level, this is part of the business school. So you know, information. There's a good information systems journal, but you know, there's another realm, a layer of great business journals. Then business management, that's a part of social science. So then a layer above that are the great social science journal. And then, of course, social science is a part of science. So it's sort of, if you want to go by nature science, then I would put ASQ there on that layer, on the social science layers. And beneath that would be the sort of AMJ management science type papers. And then we have MISQ and ISR. You know what I mean? So it's just, I'm in a very tiny field. I'm not on the layers of the social and the true science and stuff like that. That's how I look at it.
I wouldn't put management science above us. I would put it, I think you can get rejected from MISQ or ISR, reformulate it, and still send it to management science or you know, some of the operations.
Since we're talking about this, so, you know, we have some experience, I guess, being around the block, but I don't have experience with many of these journals. So I totally, I've probably submitted to the Quarterly most often. Yeah. I don't even know that, but certainly much more often than to ISR. I've never submitted to Management Science. I've submitted to AMR and AMJ once. I've published in some of the AOM journals, but not in all of them. I've never submitted to ASQ, so I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea other than a few papers that I've read. Yeah.
Well, the story is ASQ. I mean, to get in there is very difficult and you need awesome data. But all right, so let's shift gears back to IS. We have our top 2 journals. We discussed those a little bit. What's the third best journal in the field of information systems?
So again, very biased perspective. To me, it's JIS. To many others, it would be JMIS. Right. And it's and I call out my bias because this is really the research that I do has a lot more representation in JIS. So sort of like what I publish goes there more easily than JMIS. And what I read much more from JIS than JMIS. JMIS just has topics that have very little to do with what I do personally, right? So I think I've only submitted once or twice to JMIS, but I have a whole bunch of papers in JAIS, and I have submitted obviously way more times. So it's just really like a lot of the topics there speak more to me and vice versa than with JMIS.
I just had an experience where I have a paper forthcoming in each of them. So I just went through the review process.
Okay, talk about it. That would be
and
interesting.
I would say they are both equally hard and fairly comparable to MISQ ISR.
Absolutely.
They are both demanding the level of rigor you would expect from an elite journal. They both want to be elite journals, but we always think of them as really good journals, but not quite MISQ and ISR. And I think historically it was always MISQ ISR, then JMIS. And what's been happening the last 20 years, because it's the journal of the AIS, people are partisan about this. They're really trying to get that in the conversation, right? They think our association should have our elite journal, not these. So a lot of people, they have some really great editors. A lot of people are getting involved with it. That ABS ranking actually has JAIS as the only other 4-star.
I know.
After
4-star,
MISQ and ISR, and JMIS is not considered a 4-star. So I think there's a battle going on there.
There is a battle, and when the FT, the Financial Times used to be a 45 journalist, and they extended to a 50 journalist a couple of years ago. And back then, there was quite an intense debate within IS which of the 2 journals it should promote, because they said, well, we have room for one more IS journal. Should it be JMIS or JIS? And JMIS just got the nod, so to speak. So they were always very equal. So I tell you, as I said, I don't have a lot of experience with JMIS. I every now and then get an email from Vladimir, and he asks me to review a paper, and I do that. And it's sort of, I get an email, I send an email, and that's it. So, but it's fine.
And, so you said Vladimir, and people might not know this, but there's a guy named Vladimir Zwas, who I guess has been was he the founding editor of JMIS?
Absolutely.
And he still manages every single paper in that journal for like the last 4 decades, right? This guy, he does it through email. It's kind of funny, but I'll tell you why. This is why JMIS has always maintained the level of high status in our field. And it's entirely Andrew Winston from UT Austin, and a track at Hicks for economists. There's a track at Hicks, and they have a fast track. They take the best papers from Hicks is the Hawaiian Conference in Information Systems. So they take it's every January. Submission date is June 15th, and it is the best conference because when you present at Hicks, you've been to Hicks. When you present at Hicks, you have like senior people. It's really relaxed. People are wearing Hawaiian shirts. It's very nice. But they have a track that if you're in the top, they'll take some of the papers and they'll fast track them and they get published in JMIS. So Andy Winston is one of the most prolific economists in the IS field. People like Eric Brynjolfsson and, the celebrity economists publish in JMIS. It's got a very strong kind of, now it does other things. The paper I did was qualitative that is being published there. So they do everything, but I think that's kept it kind of elite, because a lot of celebrities, and then I think a lot of people in AIS are really trying their hardest to get that to be equal to or pass by JMIS as the
I would say that. I mean, they have great papers in JMIS on great topics. They really do. They're very topical. They're very fast on very topical phenomena, and it's very good research. What comes out there. I rarely ever see a fluke. Yeah. So I just don't have a lot of experience with them. So I will say this about JIS. What I love about it? I really do love about it is the fact that it's a much leaner review process. Usually you have an SE and 2, maybe 3 reviewers. They screw the AE level. And it's wonderful. I swear to God, it's a lot faster. So some of the most recent papers were really 2 rounds, 2 sets of comments, some brief editorial remarks, bam, 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 bam. That's a lot easier for authors to handle than 20 pages from 5 different people, and that for 4 rounds. I really like that about JAS. Yeah.
I just sent a paper in there. They have a thing called a promise track. You know this thing or promise
I've read about
where
it,
it's like up or down. You're basically telling them take it or leave it. And so we submitted a paper that we did just to see what it was about, right? And we submitted this paper, and it's basically like you either have to tell us you're conditionally accepting it or not. That's what this promise thing is. And that means if it's not real close, they just reject it. They don't give you revisions. So you're taking a risk as an author. So you have to think it's good. So we did that, and we got a revision. So they said, okay, so basically it's a conditional accept in the first round, but you have to do these things. And if you don't do the things, they can still reject you. But if you do, they give you a specific path to publication. If you do it, you're in. So I like that a lot, right? And they're doing it. I think that's a cool innovation at JAS.
Yeah. And I think they're very open, for example, to some niche communities like design science. There's a lot of design science and design theory type of work. They're now, with Dorothy at the helm, they're very open to theoretical work. I think at the moment they're trying to model AMR, like become the theory journal or something, which is not a bad strategy. There's room for all these types of flavors, I think, in our field as it grows. So these are good strategies. It's very open. As I said, I love the review process. So I submit there a lot. And actually, I think it might be the journal with most of my public. I don't know, but it would be certainly right up there.
The other thing they're doing at JAS is John King is running
the policy department.
Policy. Yeah. So if you have policy ideas, I guess you can send it there and I don't know what it looks like, but yeah.
Well, I've done one. Yeah. With Wolf Ketter.
You have done one.
Yeah. And with Wolf and Rick Watson, which I think is a really good idea, actually. It's a paper about intermittency in renewable energy and how to have a digital policy to solve the intermittency issue. Intermittency issue is when you have a renewable energy subject to vagaries of wind and sunshine and stuff like that, and you have to basically balance out demand fluctuation and supply fluctuation, right?
Totally.
And then we have an idea for a policy with what we call digital mirror action. Anyway, it's a policy paper. It's really a policy, like do this, do this.
That's
do this.
Awesome.
And we send it to John. It came out in the last issue, the issue before, and it actually had 5 revisions. Like it went back and forth, back and forth. Yeah. But really quick. And with him, it's sort of like he looks at it and you get an email back from John the next day or something. But in a way, it was revised 5 times at least.
Well, and he gutted all I worked with him, and he was my postdoc mentor at Michigan, and whenever I send him a paper, he just guts it. He cuts out like 40% of what I've written and just and streamlines it. Right. So yeah, he's brutal. All right. So those are our top 4 journals, I guess. I think most people would agree that kind of the basket is the journals that for whatever reason people have decided they're representing what's good in our field. And then of the basket, these are the 4 kind of that get the nod for. Yeah. But then there's ISJ, JIT, Aegis, which are all excellent journals, right?
They're very good journals, yeah.
And the question is there a difference? So let's pick those 3, ISJ, JIT, and Aegis. Aegis is a European journal. I'll tell you what our buddy Stefan says, why he would submit to JIT, Journal of Information Technology.
You've told this story
I've told
before.
You this?
It's the best named journal of them all. It's the best name.
Yeah, because people outside of our field, they think Journal of Information Technology. They think information technology. They don't think information systems. So they just assume and that's why it has such a great, one of the reasons it has such a great impact factor and everything.
So I like these 3 journals because we go moving a little bit below this, we're the best and we publish everything. This super open, super general, super inclusive, and they have a little bit more of a differentiation, right? So the European journal does have an emphasis, or at least tries to have an emphasis historically, I think, on European scholarship, both in terms of sort of data sources, where's the data coming from? Is it about a US company or about a European company? But also in terms of European approaches to scholarship. If you think about the critical, the engaged, qualitative, or even the design-oriented tradition out of Europe. So it used to be the place for this. And I think what Mike Myers has been doing since he took over 2 years ago, he's broadening that orientation to region 2, sort of including Africa. Yeah, so there's a lot more paper about from African scholars with African approaches to African topics or data sources than I've ever seen before. So this is sort of like I think of it as the moment as the Region 2 journal. It has in my view, it has the same quality. The review process handle the same thing. They're all very comparable. Good editors, solid reviews, similar length of the process. So there, I think this is really, what do they publish? One of the great things I think about European journalists during the pandemic, they had this fast response running special issue, let's call it this. They had a special communications. So if you had something about a digital response to COVID or something related to this, misinformation, the dashboards, the tracking apps, whatever, they implemented very quickly a fast review process where you can get your paper out in a month or two. It's super fast, yeah? And it was cool because within a year we had 30 IS papers about the pandemic, like solid papers, yeah. So with this is how people work from home. This is the impact of different tracing app. This is the spread of misinformation, blah blah blah. IS topics about the pandemic, not these sort of we should be doing more calls for action type of papers, but real true solid papers, and just really quickly handled.
So of those three journals that I just mentioned, and let's say you had a survey-based paper where you did maybe a matched pair survey of something, right? Where would you send it? Which of the three?
ISJ.
Why ISJ?
Well, JIT to me is a British journal.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think 2 out of the 3 editors are still, there's Chris Sauer and I think Leslie Wilcox. They're both eminent, great British scholars, very much in the very critical British tradition.
That's what I was thinking. ISJ to me, of the 3, has the strongest qualitative character. That would have been the last of the 3 that I would have sent. Although I have a survey paper, I guess, published in ISJ.
Well, sort of early 2000s, absolutely. They wouldn't publish any number. But I think they open it up. So I see a lot of survey papers there. My last survey paper was also in there, in ISJ. So JIT, I don't think published any. JIT to me is the very interpretive, qualitative, sort of English journal that we have. So I wouldn't send a survey there. No. European journal, you can send surveys there. It might not be
I think
enough.
European journal you could send anything to, right?
Yeah.
You can do qualitative design, quant, econ. They even have like econometrics papers and stuff in there. I don't think you would send an econometrics paper to ISJ or JIT, right?
No, absolutely. No, I agree. Yeah. So what about your computational work? Can you send that to all the journals?
Oh, good question. I've never tried. I imagine you can, actually. I'd have to think about it, but yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
So you work with all the students at the DC, right? So when they present their work, how do you, and they ask you, where can I publish this? How does this normally go? Normally it goes something like, can I publish this in MISQ or ISR? And then you say, yeah, maybe give it a shot or whatever. What's the advice you give for people? How do you figure out which journal paper you should send where?
Well, I'll tell you this right now, because I can give you direct, because I just ran into this at the Doctoral Consortium. The first thing I do is figure out where they're from. And based on where they're from and who their advisor is, and this is horrible, it's biased, but the way they describe their research to me, I get a sense just very quickly. All right, is this going to fly at MISQ or ISR? And if I think it might, then I kind of steer them in that direction. If I think it might not, then I don't steer them in that direction, right? And I bring up other journals and I talk about the basket or Financial Times list. If it's a U.S. school and the person is clearly going research track, I think if you're a junior professor, you really need some things, your best things in the UT Dallas list. So it's fewer. Neither JAIS nor JMIS are on the UT Dallas list. We only have ISR and MISQ. Now, OrgSci and other journals that will publish IS work, right? Organization science, management science, these folks will publish IS papers. If you kind of give it a slightly broader spin than just IS, like you make it more general management. But the problem is that's the currency of the realm in the U.S. is the UT Dallas list. So if it's your best work, if it's your dissertation work, those are career makers. You got to try for those. And if you don't get them, fine. If you got to try. In Europe and in the rest of the world, from what I've heard, sometimes they don't distinguish between, say, JAIS and MISQ. They're both basket and they're both wonderful, and if that's the case, then sometimes you think about who the editor is. You send it to an editor, not to a journal, right?
I think,
You find out, who am I citing? Whose research am I building on? And that person whose research you're building on, if you're doing a decent job, will be more likely to work with you to revise it, to make it a good contribution, right? Yeah. I think we often think that what we did is great. The problem is what we did is always really flawed. So we need that editor to work with us. We need a generous editor that sees potential in our research to work a couple rounds with us to make sure it's cleaned up for their journal. So we just, you think you submit your best work, but you need that editor to buy in and then help you.
Well, that's usually the type of advice that I would give, right? It's really, you got to look at the list of editors who would like your topic and your approach. So take me as an example. At the moment, based on the last time I checked ISR, I don't think there's any editor that really fits what I'm doing and how I'm doing things. So that's why I don't send a lot of stuff there at the moment. These things change. Every year the board changes, so it could be a very different situation next year.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. So just because you have once had this experience with a journal doesn't mean that the next year it'll never publish that. What I get a lot is, I am doing this type of work. Let's say I'm doing design science. You can't publish that in MIS Quality or ISR. Well, that's bullshit. It's absolute bullshit. Yeah, of course you can. Yeah. Everything you can publish anything anywhere. It doesn't mean, it's no guarantee, of course, but I don't think any of the journal has a very clear, we don't publish this type of work, type of statement anymore. They used to,
right,
but not anymore.
Right. Well, and I mean, if you look at design science, say in ISR, right, there's of course Abbasi, who, if you're doing
there's
something
a lot
technical,
of design
send
science,
it to him. But there are also these guys like, and I'm just looking at their editorial board right now. There are guys like Rajiv Kohli, for example, who can he's been around a while. He could probably handle anything you send him. Like, you could literally send Rajiv Kohli an analytical model or a qualitative paper and he'd handle it, right? So I think there are these like general purpose people who, another one might be, Jason Thatcher's there. There are these people who could probably handle a variety, right? And I think MISQ has a bunch of those as well. As a matter of fact, I would put you in that category at MISQ. I feel like I could literally send you anything.
I get literally any type of paper. I have had anything except for pure econometrics. I don't get these because I literally say, like, don't send me these papers. That's really not my strength. Absolutely not. Hey, but we haven't talked about JSIS, Journal of Strategic Information System. I think it's a pretty unique one because that's the only journal that has a topical restriction.
Exactly.
And it's about strategy. It's amazing in a sense that all the other ones are very general level, broad, inclusive in topics and approaches, but this one is about strategy. So if your work is not at some level related to strategy, well, you can't really publish it there.
Yeah. No, and the nice thing about JSIS is it gets a ton of citations. It's got a lot of wonderful papers, and I've never published there. That might be the only basket journal that I never published in. Did you ever publish there?
I published one paper on entrepreneurship, right?
Okay.
Because that was sort of the closest I ever get to strategy. So we have a digital entrepreneurship paper, which was a good process, was part of a special issue in JSIS on digital entrepreneurship. And sort of a couple of rounds, good reviews, to get it through, done. But that's it. I think that's the only submission. It's sort of 1-for-1, so to speak, in JSIS. I can't remember ever sending anything else there. Yeah.
Well, and there are other niches that are kind of IS journals. Like one that I have a couple papers in, and I think you do as well, is BPMJ. The Business Process Management Journal. I think that's kind of a cross-disciplinary field, but a lot of IS researchers publish there, and it's business process management, right?
BPM. Yeah,
and everything in there is about process. So there are some niches like that are kind of IS. As a matter of fact, so I remember someone told me once that, so I have 2 papers in BPMJ, and I got a paper rejected. And someone told me once, but that's the paper, that's the Journal of Universal Acceptance or something like that. And I'm like, how could it be universal? I got rejected,
But you're right. I mean, when I was doing a lot of BPM stuff, we would send a lot of papers there, and most of them got accepted. And in fact, at some stage, I had the same impression. It's like, well, they don't reject any paper until they actually started rejecting my papers as well. Yeah, so it does happen.
Maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it was easier to get in, and now it's actually more selective.
A lot of them, yeah, it could be. So you are familiar with INO. I've never submitted there, but I've submitted and published quite a lot in INM. So if the basket level, let's call it that, doesn't work, then I would basically automatically either go to INM or DSS, Decision Support Systems. Depends on what the paper is. But INM is a top level journal, I think. It sits outside the basket, but it could just as well be in it. And a lot of people
I don't think it's lower than the basket.
Absolutely not.
Right? Like same with INO actually. If someone shows me a qualitative paper from say JIT and then a qualitative paper from INO, the journal doesn't signal to me that one's better or worse than the other, right? And I think INM, I have the same impression. I get an INM paper, I would categorize it in the basket, although it's not in the basket, right?
Yeah, exactly. To me, it's the same thing. It's all the same. It's certainly on the level of EJS and JIT and all the other ones. It's very well managed. It is broad and inclusive. Yeah, Patrick Chow always says, well, the title says information, speaking to IT folks, and management, basically covering the entire business discipline. And he said once to me, and he loves it because it gives him a lot of leeway to consider which paper he can publish, because it's about information management. You can interpret it in many, many ways. But it's got very efficient review processes. You got an editor, you got a bunch of reviewers. It's not too long or too extensive. They usually make their decisions in 2 to 3 rounds. I haven't seen anything like 4 or 5 rounds there ever. And DSS is the same. They're tough in the first round.
I'm looking at the ABS list of top information management, and the 3 4-stars they have are ISR, MIS Quarterly, and JAIS. Then the 4s that they give, which is the next level, are essentially the basket: JMIS, Aegis, ISJ, JIT, Journal of Strategic Information Systems. Then we get down to DSS, which I've never supported or done anything with the DSS. What's that like?
DSS is a to me, I would characterize it's a journal that sits on the boundaries between information systems, software engineering, and general computer science. So it's sort of like
it's a computer sciencey.
Yeah. So, and what I love about it, it has incredible reach. Yeah, because the software engineering community, for example, IS people tend to think of it as a small community. Why? It's way bigger. Of course, there's way more software engineers than IS folks, right? And this is really highly regarded them. So if you publish that, you really speak to these folks as well, which most of the other IS journals don't do. So I got some DSS papers that are really well cited, and most of the citations would not be from IS, but would be from within software engineering. So it really is crossing the disciplinary boundaries to that direction.
Yeah, and then in that same category, they put INM and INO, Government Information Quarterly, which I don't know anything about. I imagine it's government stuff. And then they have 2 others: Information Society, or 3 others: Information Society, Information Systems Frontiers, and IT and People. Yeah. Right. So these are I think IT and People is very qualitative. It's very similar in profile to INO, I would say. I have a paper.
It's been around for a while. Yeah. IT and People. Never done anything with that journal. I only know ISF, IS Frontiers. Yeah. And here on that, I think we are now talking about a different level of quality. And you notice that in the papers, but also in the review process and the way these journals are. I really think so. It's it does go down a notch a little bit. So, for example, I had a paper, it took years. The review process took years, not because it was several rounds, just because it took so long. And afterwards, it was in the queue for another 3 years. I kid you not. Mm-hmm. So it came out way too late. By the time it came out, the topic was dead, really. So,
So, except that the Information Society, I have a couple papers in there. And I would argue that that's an incredibly thoughtful journal, and it's a journal the way that journals probably should be, because they'll reject papers. But if it's something around policies, and it's not really business, it's more of like, what are big societal level issues, right? So I have one on Wikipedia and one on like intellectual property laws, right? Okay. And I thought the review process was really cool because it's super thoughtful. and they treat you like an adult. And they're like, here, deal with this and this. And then it was published pretty quickly. So I actually liked Information Society. And over the years, I found papers in Information Society that I've liked. So, but that's down there on that next list as well. And then they have a whole bunch of others. We're not going to get into them. I will bring one that they've ranked even lower. And it's called the Database for Advances in Information Systems, which now I have a couple papers in there as well. What do you think of that one? It's IEEE, isn't it?
No, it's ACM.
Or ACM.
It's ACM.
It's an ACM.
And I think it's run by Tom Stafford now.
Okay,
and what's her name? Stacey Petter, I think.
Okay.
Stacey.
But that's the whole thing that when I looked at it and I'm thinking, what journal do I send it to? I just picked that one because it's ACM. And I figure at least ACM is like, it's kind of like that Informs, right? It's a legitimate, organ.
You know what? Like back in the day, I used to think that ACM databases was a vehicle to publish a theoretical idea, and then the empirics to that would come into the quarterly. Give you one example. I think in 2010 or 2011, there was a guy called Brent Fourneau, and he did work on IS discontinuance, not continuance, not continued adoption, but when you decide to get rid of it, right? IS discontinuance. And he has one paper in the database which talks about a theoretical model, how you can think about discontinuance. And then like sort of half a year or a year later, he has got this big empirical study with theoretical implication in the quarterly. That's how I usually pictured it, like back in the day. So I don't know whether they still run it this way, but I used to think of it as that's for the theoretical idea, and then the sound study can go into one of the other journals.
Yeah, there's a wide range of papers in there and whatever, but I think it's respected more than it's kind of given on this list in a way, right? And it's maybe just because I published there, but it makes me think of ACM transactions on MIS. TMIS, is that the one, right?
Yeah.
That's not on this list. And again, because of its relationship with ACM, I would think it should be probably more prestigious than a lot of these, maybe even more. Like outside of a business school, if I have an ACM transactions, ACM database, right, in computer science, in the more engineering oriented, they would look at that and go, oh, that's legitimate. Because in engineering, they don't necessarily worry too much about levels of journal. They just say, okay, ACM or IEEE, that's generally agree. Good stuff, right?
Exactly. I will say one thing about the database. I think since Tom and Stacey, and I think I'm missing one editor, they have been doing an incredible job at pushing that level up. I think over the last couple of years, not all journals have been going up. A lot of them are sort of just quietly churning their wheels. I think, but some journals really work on their strategy, and I think this is one of them. So I think it's getting a little bit more traction. It's a little bit more in the in the visibility space of people. That's how I perceive it anyway. And, it has more interesting papers. It has interesting editorials and sort of debates and stuff like that. So it draws attention.
And they have this, I think it's maybe Nick Hassan who runs this. It's a Philosopher's Corner. And they have this special section. So of course I like this, right? And they had, so actually we published one thing there with our friends Jan Mendling and Stefan Zeidel and Thomas Griswold, because they had this debate about Feyerabend. Feyerabend's a famous philosophy of science sort of provocateur. Against method. So this fellow Trebelmeyer or something.
Trebelmeyer from Austria. Yep.
Yeah, he published a thing kind of espousing Feyerabend, and then a bunch of people. We published a kind of a response a year later, but right afterwards, Andrew Burton-Jones and a few other people published responses, but they're trying to create a conversation in a journal. So it's not like you just need one gold-plated article, get it out there, now you're done. Instead, why not have this theme? And if you want to write something about Feyerabend, well, you should probably write it in that stream at that journal, right? And that I think is the key. Like if I were to give the number one bit of advice two bits of advice to young people as far as picking journals. The first is send it to the editor, not the journal. Yes, journal matters because of prestige, and figure out which ones you need, what level of prestige you need for your career. And then after you've figured out the level of prestige you need, then find the editor. Right. So that's the number one bit of advice. The other bit of advice for, if you have an idea and you want to publish the idea, do it where that conversation is happening. kind of like this databases, if you want to write a little bit about philosophy, and you think it applies to the IS field, don't try. I mean, I guess you could try and get it in an MISQ, and it might get in every once in a while. They do, but for every one that gets in MISQ, there are 300 that got rejected, right? You don't see the rejections, and many of them might be better than the ones that actually somehow slipped their way in. But I think the way you do it, the appropriate way to do it, is to send it to the journal where the conversation is happening, right? If you're sending if you're doing product innovation, send it to the Journal of Product Innovation Management, right? If you're doing entrepreneurship, send it to, Journal of Business Venturing or Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice, right? Go where and I think you're better off going where the conversations are actually happening than trying too hard to target a journal. Right?
So in wrapping up, I agree. It's really good advice, both of them, right? Find the conversation and go there and look at the editors, not the journal. Yeah, so I fully agree with these. In wrapping up, let me just say, I want to make 2 points of criticism about the journals. So one is, as you know, I've started publishing also outside of IS, so OrgSci, some of the management journals, and of course the entrepreneurship journals. A lot of them have moved away from the 3 to 4 reviewers to editors and have a much leaner review team, and I'm a very big fan of that. I think it's just much more author friendly. It's much clearer, more consistent advice. If you have too many people reviewing, you just get such a diversity of opinion, makes it really difficult to figure out any revision strategy. So JBV, ETP, OrgScience, we always had an editor and 2 reviewers. Bam, bam, bam. It still amounts to like 6. It's difficult revisions and stuff like that, but it's way more doable than 2 editors, all of which trying to be constructive and developmental, which means they write pages of text, plus the reviewers who think they need to write pages of text. That's a lot of text. Yeah.
So I agree with you. The one argument, the counter argument I've heard to that is that really, if you look at the associate editor, that's training for senior editor. It's training and filtering. So number one, like I learned being an associate editor for, say, Andrew Burton Jones, where he was the senior editor, I was the associate editor. I imitated him and some other people that I worked with, right? So it trained me, right? So it's training for future senior editors is one reason for associate editor. The other reason for an associate editor is to be able to filter. You can't look at my scholarship and know what kind of editor I am. But if you're a senior editor working with me as associate editor, you can see me and then you can say, okay, I trust Nick to be a senior editor when his career gets to that point or whatever, right?
Well,
so that's why I don't mind the 2 level, but I do think once you have senior and associate, you don't need 3 reviewers, and you certainly don't need 3 reviewers past round 2. At that point, you've either the reason you use reviewers, really the editors should be doing all the work. Reviewers are just catching stuff that the editors might not see. By second round, you should see everything, and now the editors do their work. You don't need reviewers anymore. Reviewers are just like a quick sanity check, make sure they're catching things the editors may not see. Editors have to do their job of editing, which means you make the decisions, you give them a path to publication, you do everything. You don't have to satisfy reviewers. Reviewers are like a little thing you have in your pocket just to make sure you're not doing anything. So
I think that a lot of the other fields are moving quicker to a leaner review process, and a lot of them really have stop and go decision after 2 rounds. So a lot of
them have desk. So OrgSci, I know, has a huge desk reject policy, right? Most of the time you're going to get a desk reject at OrgSci, and if it gets to the review process, you have a chance. That's how I like to run my papers. If I send it out to review, chances are I think this thing can be published. Other words, I'm desk rejecting or desk revising.
Yep. Well, I don't do a lot of desk revise, but I agree on the other count. So that's one criticism where I think we can just, in our field, we can operate our journals a little bit better, more efficiently. It also scales much better. If you think about it, that the field is growing, more papers, it's just a lot of resources you need to dedicate to getting these 2 and 3 sets of reviewers and editors on every single paper. So the second point I want to make, year 2022, as an author, I have absolutely no respect anymore for journals that don't have the review cycle time under control. Yeah, and I have some, and I can name them right now. I have 1 or 2 journals in our basket who don't have their, mind you, shit together, and we still have review cycles that are 7-8 months. I'm sitting on a paper waiting. This is the 3rd or 4th time we send it back in, and it's been another 5 months, and I have absolutely no regard, and I swear to God, I will not submit to this journal anymore. Absolutely not. Yeah. So the good journals, they have that under control. In a 2 to 3 month, you will have your comments back. Now when we talked about this, can it be 3 weeks? That would be even better, or 2 weeks or something. But I have absolutely no respect anymore for any journal, and that means the editors, really.
Yeah.
That don't turn around a paper in more than 4 months at the maximum. I understand.
Yeah, I would put that maybe at 3 months, but the idea is the same. That we should not have things going 6 months in today's day and age.
Absolutely not. No.
We're not in 1970 anymore. All right. You can find a way in your busy schedule, and if you can't,
you should be an editor.
Around in 3 months. Just don't be an editor. Right? You don't have to. No one's forcing you to be an editor. You don't have to do this. If you can't do a good job with what you've agreed to do, then don't do it. And a good job also means some element of timeliness. You don't have to do it in a week, although you probably could, as far as quick rejections or the editor decisions. But yeah. So, all right, here's the problem though. We finished our podcast today with this impassioned, negative, angry, vitriolic thing. We have to be all right. Here's the beauty. I'm going to set a positive note. The beauty is, we have a bunch of respectable journals, right? In the sense that, even if it's not in the basket, places like BISA, INO, INM, databases, a lot of these others, they're nice journals. BPMJ, you publish there, it might not be that difficult, but it's excellent. It gets a lot of eyeballs. There's a lot of great research published there. And you know what? We are... I almost think that maybe this basket thing, I realize it helps people get tenure and everything. I also think it was maybe a disservice, right? Because I kind of like the idea that you just have a bunch of good journals. And I think we do. So we're lucky in that, right?
So maybe a funny story towards the end. We had Kathy Urquhart visiting us here in Hamburg a couple of weeks ago. And she happened to be on a task force where they review, like the senior scholars in AIS, they review the basket every other year, every 5 years or so. They take a look and say, like, should we make changes? Should we disband it or whatever? So she's been on that, and she gave a few insights. And my view on this is, I think the basket was good when it was established, and now it should be abandoned. I don't think we need it. I don't think we need it anymore, because you're right. Our journals have legitimacy within and outside of our field. Yeah, we don't have to worry about this anymore. We arrive. We're here. We're fine. Yeah, everyone accepts it. So why do we need the basket? So anyway, I said that to Kathy.
I'm not sure we ever needed the basket.
And she obviously asked, they did a big survey and focus groups and stuff. And the questions are usually, should it be smaller, a basket of 7? Should it be bigger, basket of 9? Should it stay, or should it be abandoned? And I said, oh, look, get rid of it. That's my view. Publicly, get rid of it. And she said I was literally the only senior scholar that said to get rid of it.
Well, I'm not a senior scholar like you, but I would say get rid of it too. I mean, come on. Yeah. Anyway, all right, my brother, this was fun.
We're back.
See you next time.
We'll see you next time. Folks, every 2 weeks, your usual dose of blabbering mouth, very little preparation, huge reading lists. But we're back, and we're going to make some Twitter fanfare that people notice that we're back. All right, good to see you, Nick. Talk to you next time.